twin sons of Arendor hung low in the sky, casting a warm, golden hue over the capital city of Lyanthea. The sprawling metropolis, a marvel of both ancient artistry and futuristic engineering, was bathed in the amber light, making the towering spires and crystalline structures gleam like the facets of a precious gem. Airships, sleek and silent, glided through the sky, their engines humming with the energy of the city's boundless vitality. At the heart of this gleaming city stood the Celestial Palace, a magnificent edifice of iridescent stone and floating gardens. It was here, within the palace's grand hall, that Queen Elysia awaited her guest, a man whose reputation had traveled across the stars, a man who was said to embody the virtues of honor, courage, and indomitable will. The queen, clad in robes of shimmering silver that clung to her statuesque form like liquid light, paced the marble floor of the hall. Her thoughts were turbulent, though she hid it well behind the serene mask she wore as a ruler. Her long, platinum hair flowed down her back in waves, catching the light and glowing, as if it were spun from the very essence of the stars. Her violet eyes, sharp and discerning, gazed towards the great doors of the hall, where any moment now, the legendary Captain Mark would enter. Mark. His name had been spoken in hushed tones by the emissaries who had first brought word of him to Aelysia's court. He was a soldier of Earth, a planet on the outer rim of the galaxy, a place far less advanced than Arendor but known for producing warriors of unparalleled skill and resolve. Mark had distinguished himself in countless battles, leading forces through some of the most treacherous conflicts in recent history. His deeds had earned him respect and admiration, not just among his own people, but across the galaxy. Yet Aelysia was not interested in him solely for his military prowess. There was something about the way he was described, his unyielding sense of justice, his compassion for those under his command, and his unwavering moral compass that intrigued her. Aelysia, who had spent her entire life surrounded by sycophants and political schemers, longed for someone who was not just capable, but genuinely good. A soft chime echoed through the hall, and the great doors began to part. Aelysia composed herself, standing tall as Captain Mark entered the room. He was not what she had expected. The man who walked into the grand hall was every bit as formidable as she had heard, yet there was a quietness to his presence, a stillness that spoke of deep contemplation rather than mere bravado. Mark was tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of his years of combat, yet he moved with a grace that belied his size. His dark hair was cut short, framing a face that was both rugged and handsome, with eyes that seemed to have seen too much of both the horrors and the beauties of the universe. Mark wore the uniform of an Earth soldier, a sleek, black ensemble that contrasted sharply with the opulence of the palace. The insignia on his chest glinted in the light, a symbol of his rank and his hard-won honors. Yet for all his accolades, there was a humility in his demeanor, a sense of quiet strength that resonated with Aelysia. The queen stepped forward to greet him, her voice smooth and melodic. "Captain Mark, welcome to Lyanthea. It is an honor to have you here." Mark bowed respectfully, his movements fluid and practiced. "The honor is mine, Your Majesty. Your kingdom is as beautiful as it is renowned. I am grateful for your hospitality." Aelysia smiled, though her mind was already at work, observing him closely. She could see the sharpness in his gaze, the way his eyes took in every detail of the room, assessing potential threats and escape routes a soldier's instinct. But there was also a softness there, a warmth that suggested he was more than just a man of war. "I trust your journey was comfortable," Aelysia inquired, motioning for him to walk with her. "It was, thank you," Mark replied, falling into step beside her. "Your hospitality is unmatched. I have seen many worlds, but none as radiant as yours." Aelysia led him through the grand hall, past towering statues of ancient kings and queens, and out onto a balcony that overlooked the city. From here, the full splendor of Lyanthea could be seen: the sprawling streets filled with citizens, the floating platforms that connected the many districts, and the glistening waters of the Irani River that wound through the city like a silver thread. Mark paused, taking in the view, his expression unreadable. "Your city is extraordinary," he said after a moment. "I can see why your people are so proud of it." Aelysia nodded, her gaze following his. "Lyanthea is the heart of our kingdom, a symbol of all that we have achieved. But with such beauty comes great responsibility. Our advancements have brought us prosperity, but they also make us a target. We must always be vigilant, always prepared to defend what we hold dear." Mark turned to her, his eyes narrowing slightly. And is that why you requested my presence, your majesty? Do you believe your kingdom is under threat? Elysia met his gaze, her expression serious. There are always threats, Captain. Some from without, but many from within. The greatest challenge a ruler faces is not just defending their kingdom from external enemies, but ensuring that the foundations of their society remain strong. That is where true leadership lies. Mark seemed to consider her words carefully. I agree, your majesty. Leadership is about more than wielding power, it's about guiding your people, ensuring their safety and prosperity, and making difficult decisions for the greater good. Elysia studied him for a moment, sensing the depth of his convictions. This was a man who had lived by those principles, who had fought and bled for them. She could see why so many spoke of him with such reverence. But the question remained, could he be the one to stand by her side, not just as a military leader, but as a partner in every sense of the word? Captain Mark, she began, her voice softening slightly, I have read many reports of your bravery and skill, but I would like to hear from you what drives you, what compels a man to dedicate his life to the defense of others, to take on burdens that most would flee from. Mark hesitated, as if the question had caught him off guard. He glanced out at the city once more, his expression thoughtful. I suppose it comes down to a sense of duty, he said slowly. I've seen what happens when good men do nothing. When those in power abuse their positions or turn a blind eye to suffering. I've witnessed entire worlds fall into chaos because those who could make a difference chose not to act. I vowed a long time ago that I would not be one of those people. If I can make a difference, if I can protect those who cannot protect themselves, then I believe it is my duty to do so. There was a weight to his words, a sincerity that resonated deeply with Elysia. Here was a man who understood the true nature of power, who did not seek it for its own sake but as a means to serve and protect. It was a rare quality, and one that she found herself drawn to. And yet, Elysia said, her tone contemplative, such a path is not without sacrifice. You must have given up much to live by such a creed. Mark nodded, a shadow passing over his features. Yes, your majesty. A life dedicated to service leaves little room for anything else. But I have no regrets. The lives I've saved, the people I've helped, those are the things that matter. Elysia felt a pang of empathy for him. She, too, had made sacrifices in her role as queen, had placed the needs of her people above her own desires time and time again. In Mark she saw a kindred spirit, someone who understood the burdens of leadership and the loneliness that often accompanied it. As they stood there, the sun slowly dipping below the horizon, Elysia felt a sense of clarity. This man, this soldier from a distant world, might very well be the answer to the question that had haunted her for so long. But before she could make any decisions, she needed to know more, to understand him not just as a leader, but as a person. Captain Mark, she said, turning to face him fully, there is much I would like to discuss with you, if you are willing. I believe there is more to your visit here than just diplomacy. I think we could learn much from each other, and perhaps find common ground in our shared responsibilities. Mark met her gaze, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he nodded. I would be honored, your majesty. Elysia smiled, a genuine warmth in her eyes. Then let us continue this conversation over dinner. There is much to discuss, and I would like to hear more of your thoughts on leadership, and perhaps share some of my own. As they turned to leave the balcony, the first stars of the evening began to twinkle in the sky above them, a reminder that even in the vastness of the galaxy, connections could be forged, and paths could converge in the most unexpected ways. For Elysia, this was the beginning of something new, something that could change not just her life, but the future of her entire kingdom. And as she walked beside Mark, she felt a spark of hope ignite within her, a hope that perhaps, at long last, she had found the partner she had been searching for. Little did they know, the decisions they would make in the coming days would ripple across the stars, setting in motion events that would shape the destiny of not just one kingdom, but an entire galaxy. The palace gardens of Lyanthea were a wonder of the galaxy, a serene oasis where nature and technology harmonized in a breathtaking display of Arendor's mastery over both. Ancient trees, their trunks spiraling in intricate patterns, stood alongside flora engineered to bloom in colors no human eyes had ever seen. Crystal-clear streams meandered through the lush greenery, their waters singing with soft, melodic tones as they flowed over smooth, iridescent stones. The air was perfumed with the fragrance of rare flowers that only blossomed under the twin suns, their petals glistening like jewels in the golden light. It was in this tranquil setting that Queen Elysia decided to present Captain Mark with her extraordinary proposal. The events of the previous evening had left her deeply contemplative, and she had spent much of the night in her private chambers, pondering the path that lay before her. The more she thought about it, the more certain she became that Mark was the partner she had been searching for, someone who not only possessed the qualities needed to lead, but who also understood the weight of such a responsibility. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Elysia sent a messenger to Mark's quarters, requesting his presence in the gardens. She needed to speak with him privately, away from the prying eyes and ears of the court. There was much to discuss, and the decision she was about to make would change both of their lives forever. Mark arrived promptly, dressed in a more formal version of his uniform, a dark cloak draped over his shoulders to ward off the early morning chill. As he entered the garden, he was struck by its beauty, the way the light filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground, the gentle hum of life all around him. It was a stark contrast to the worlds he had known, places ravaged by war and conflict, where beauty was often a distant memory. Elysia stood by a small pond, her reflection shimmering on the water's surface. She was dressed in a flowing gown of deep blue, the fabric adorned with delicate patterns that seemed to shift and change with her movements. Her hair was loosely braided, a few strands framing her face, giving her an almost ethereal appearance. As Mark approached, she turned to greet him, a soft smile on her lips. "Good morning, Captain," she said, her voice carrying the warmth of the rising suns. "Thank you for meeting me here." Mark bowed slightly, his expression serious. "Good morning, Your Majesty. It is my honor to be here." Elysia gestured for him to join her by the pond. "Please walk with me. There is something I wish to discuss with you, something of great importance." Mark fell into step beside her as they began to stroll through the garden. For a few moments they walked in silence, the only sounds being the rustle of leaves in the breeze and the soft chirping of distant birds. Elysia took this time to gather her thoughts, to find the right words to convey what she felt. "Captain Mark," she began, her tone thoughtful, "in the short time you have been here, I have come to respect you greatly. You are a man of honor, integrity, and strength, qualities that are rare and precious, especially in someone who has seen as much as you have." Mark listened quietly, unsure of where this conversation was leading but sensing its gravity. "Thank you, Your Majesty," he replied carefully. "I am humbled by your words." Elysia paused by a large tree, its bark glowing faintly with an inner light. She reached out to touch it, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface as she continued. "For many years I have ruled this kingdom alone, with the welfare of my people always at the forefront of my mind. But as you know, there is a growing concern among my advisors and nobles, one that I cannot ignore forever." Mark nodded, understanding the implications of her words. "You speak of the matter of succession." "Yes," Elysia said, her voice tinged with a hint of sadness. "Our kingdom is prosperous, and our people are content, but without an heir that peace is fragile. My advisors urge me to marry, to secure the future of the throne. Yet I have always resisted such pressure. I do not wish to enter into a union that is merely a political arrangement, devoid of meaning or true partnership." She turned to face Mark, her violet eyes searching his face for any sign of what he might be thinking. "For years, I've actually been attracted to human men. They are strong, imposing, and intelligent. I would like one of them to be the king of my planet. I'll be honest, that was one of the things I had in mind when I called you here to be a good leader for the army, but now I've changed my mind and I want you to marry me and be the king of my planet. I'll do anything to make you accept this offer. I'll give you fortunes and huge amounts of money." Mark's breath caught in his throat. He had anticipated many things during his time in Arendor, but this was not one of them. He felt a mix of emotions: honor, confusion, and a deep, gnawing uncertainty. He struggled to find the right response, his mind racing to process what she was saying. "Your Majesty," he began slowly, I am deeply honored by your words, but I must admit, I did not expect this. I am a soldier, a man of war. I am not sure I am suited for the role of a king." Elysia's expression softened, and she reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "Mark, I am not asking you to become a king in the traditional sense. What I seek is a true partner, someone who shares my vision for this kingdom, someone who can stand by my side, not just as a ruler but as a confidant, a friend, and perhaps more." Mark felt a strange warmth in his chest at her touch. at the sincerity in her voice. Yet his doubts remained. "Your Majesty, I have seen what power can do to people. I have witnessed the corruption it brings, the destruction it can cause. I am wary of it, and I must ask, why me? There are others, surely men of noble birth, with far more experience in governance. Why choose a soldier from a distant world?" Elijah smiled, a faint but genuine expression. "Because you are different, Mark. You have seen the worst the galaxy has to offer, yet you remain uncorrupted. You have power, but you do not seek it. You lead not for the sake of glory, but because it is right. That is the kind of man I need by my side. And as for experience, that can be learned. What cannot be learned is the integrity and compassion you already possess." Mark was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the pond, where ripples disturbed the still surface. Elijah watched him, waiting patiently, understanding the weight of the decision she was asking him to make. Finally, Mark spoke, his voice low and measured. "Your Majesty, I will not lie, I am deeply conflicted. The thought of becoming a king, of ruling alongside you, it is daunting. I have spent my life in battle, not in courts or palaces, and yet there is something about your offer that resonates with me. You speak of partnership, of building something meaningful, something lasting. That is something I can understand, something I can value." He turned to face her, his expression earnest. "But before I can give you an answer, I need to understand your true motivations. Is this offer driven by the needs of your kingdom, by the pressure of your advisors, or is there more to it? I need to know if this is something you truly want, not just something you feel you must do." Elijah looked into his eyes, seeing the depth of his sincerity, his need for honesty. She felt a surge of respect for him, for his willingness to question, to seek the truth even in a moment as uncertain as this. "Mark," she said softly, "I will not deny that the future of my kingdom is a consideration. But it is not the only reason, nor even the primary one. I have spent many years searching for someone who understands the weight of leadership. Someone who does not seek power for its own sake. I have seen too many suitors who desired the throne more than they desired a true partnership. You are different. You remind me of the kind of ruler I aspire to be, one who leads with compassion, with wisdom, and with strength. Yes, I want this, Mark. Not because I must, but because I believe we could build something great together." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Mark felt the sincerity in her voice, the vulnerability she was revealing by making such an offer. He knew this was not an easy decision for her, just as it was not for him. The weight of it pressed down on him, yet at the same time, he felt a strange sense of clarity. "You have given me much to think about, Your Majesty," he said finally, his voice steady. "This is not a decision I can make lightly, and I hope you understand if I ask for some time to consider it." Elijah nodded, a look of understanding in her eyes. "Of course, Mark, I would expect nothing less from you. Take the time you need. This decision, whatever it may be, must be made with full conviction." Mark inclined his head, feeling a mix of relief and uncertainty. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I will give this the careful thought it deserves." With that, they resumed their walk, the conversation turning to lighter topics as they continued through the gardens. Yet the weight of the proposal lingered in the air between them, an unspoken understanding that they were on the precipice of something that could change the course of their lives and the fate of an entire kingdom. As they walked, Elijah couldn't help but feel a sense of hope mingled with anticipation. She had laid her cards on the table, revealing not just her intentions, but her heart. Now it was up to Mark to decide whether he was willing to take that leap with her, into an uncertain future that held both great promise and great peril. And as for Mark, he knew that his decision would be one of the most significant he had ever made. The path before him was not clear, but in Elijah, he saw a vision of something more than just power or duty. He saw the possibility of a partnership that could truly change the galaxy for the better. But whether he could step into that role, whether he could become the man she believed him to be, only time would tell. The sun had barely begun its ascent, casting the faintest of pink hues across the sky, when Captain Mark found himself unable to sleep. The gravity of Queen Elysia's proposal weighed heavily on his mind, an ever-present shadow in his thoughts. He had spent the night in restless contemplation, replaying their conversation in the garden over and over, analyzing every word, every nuance. He had faced countless battles, stared death in the face more times than he could count. But this decision felt different. It wasn't just about strategy or survival, it was about something far more profound, something that could shape the course of an entire civilization. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that if he were to make this decision, he needed to know more. He needed to understand Elysia not just as a queen, but as a person. The morning was cool and crisp, the air tinged with the fragrance of the palace gardens, as Mark made his way towards Elysia's private quarters. He had sent a message to the queen early, requesting her company for a more personal exploration of her kingdom. He had asked to see not just the grandeur of her rule, but the heart of it, the people, the places that truly mattered to her. A part of him hoped that through this, he might find the answers he sought. As he approached the grand entrance of her private wing, he was met by one of her attendants, a young woman with hair the color of copper and eyes like emeralds, dressed in the traditional flowing robes of the palace staff. Captain Mark, the attendant greeted with a polite bow. "Her Majesty is expecting you. Please, follow me." Mark nodded in thanks, and as he was led through the intricately decorated halls of Elysia's private chambers, he couldn't help but marvel at the artistry that surrounded him. The walls were adorned with tapestries depicting scenes from Arendor's rich history, tales of valor, love, and the pursuit of knowledge. The floors were covered in mosaics that shimmered with a life of their own, depicting the stars and galaxies in a dance of light and color. But it wasn't the opulence that caught Mark's attention, it was the sense of continuity, of legacy. Each piece of art, each artifact told a story, not just of a kingdom, but of a ruler who valued culture, history, and the lessons they imparted. Finally, they arrived at a large arched doorway, guarded by two silent sentinels, clad in the traditional armor of the Arendorian royal guard. The attendant knocked lightly, and a moment later, the doors swung open to reveal a small, intimate courtyard bathed in the gentle morning light. Elysia stood at the center, dressed in a simple yet elegant gown of pale green, the color of new leaves in spring. Her hair was loosely tied back, and she looked more at ease, more natural than he had ever seen her. She was surrounded by a variety of plants and flowers, many of which Mark did not recognize, their petals catching the light and shimmering like precious gems. She turned as Mark entered, a soft smile gracing her lips. "Good morning, Captain," she greeted him warmly. "I see you are an early riser." Mark returned her smile, though his mind remained focused. "Good morning, Your Majesty. I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Elysia assured him, her voice as smooth as silk. "In fact, I was hoping we might have some time alone today. There is much I wish to show you, and perhaps much we can learn from each other." Mark nodded, grateful for the opportunity. "That's exactly what I was hoping for as well." Elysia gestured for him to join her, and as they began to walk through the courtyard, she spoke with a tone that was both reflective and open. "I thought we might start here, in this garden. It's one of the few places within the palace where I can find peace, where I can be alone with my thoughts." Mark looked around, taking in the vibrant array of life that surrounded them. "It's beautiful," he remarked, his voice tinged with admiration. "I can see why you find solace here." Elysia smiled softly. "Thank you. These plants, these flowers, they come from all over the galaxy, brought here by explorers and traders over centuries. Each one represents a different world, a different culture. Together they create something unique, something harmonious." Mark studied her as she spoke, sensing the deeper meaning behind her words. "Much like your kingdom," he observed. Elysia glanced at him, her eyes glinting with quiet acknowledgement. "Yes, our kingdom is a mosaic of many different people, cultures, and ideas. It is my duty to ensure that they continue to coexist in harmony, that the balance we have achieved is maintained. But it's not always easy, and the weight of that responsibility can be overwhelming." Mark could hear the weariness in her voice, the burden that lay beneath her regal exterior. It was a burden he understood all too well, though on a different scale. He had commanded troops in the heat of battle, made decisions that meant life or death for those under his command. But the responsibility of an entire kingdom, of ensuring not just survival but prosperity, peace, and justice, that was a weight he could scarcely imagine. "I can only imagine," Mark replied, his tone thoughtful. "Leadership is never easy, and I suspect the challenges you face are unlike any I've encountered." Elysia nodded, her gaze drifting to a cluster of delicate white flowers that seemed to glow with an inner light. "Sometimes I wonder if I am strong enough to bear it all. My people look to me for guidance, for wisdom, and I cannot afford to falter. But there are moments, in the quiet of the night, when I feel alone." Mark felt a pang of empathy for her. He had seen that same loneliness in the eyes of soldiers who had lost everything, in the faces of leaders who had borne the weight of their decisions in solitude. It was a loneliness that came with the territory, a burden that few could understand. "You are not alone, Your Majesty," Mark said quietly, his voice filled with sincerity. "You have your advisors, your people, and now, perhaps you have me as well." Elijah looked at him, and for a moment, their eyes locked, an unspoken understanding passing between them. It was a moment of connection, of shared vulnerability, and it deepened the bond that was slowly forming between them. "Thank you, Mark," Elijah said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "That means more to me than you can know." They continued their walk through the garden, and as they did, Elijah began to speak of her kingdom, of the challenges it faced, and the hopes she held for its future. She spoke of the delicate balance between tradition and progress, of the tensions that occasionally flared between the different regions and cultures within her realm. She spoke of the need for unity, for understanding, and for leadership that could guide the kingdom through both times of peace and times of crisis. Mark listened intently, his respect for Elijah growing with every word. She was not just a ruler, he realized she was a visionary, someone who saw the bigger picture, who understood the complexities of governance in a way that few could. She was a leader who cared deeply for her people, who was willing to make sacrifices for their well-being. But she was also a person, a woman who carried the weight of the crown with grace, but who longed for someone to share that burden with, someone who could see beyond the title and understand the person behind it. As the morning wore on, Elijah led Mark out of the garden and through the city of Lyanthia itself. She took him to the bustling marketplaces, where traders from across the galaxy bartered their goods and exchanged stories of distant worlds. She showed him the vast academies where scholars and scientists worked tirelessly to push the boundaries of knowledge and innovation. She introduced him to the people artists, musicians, craftsmen, whose creativity and passion gave life to the culture that defined Arendor. Everywhere they went, Elijah was greeted with reverence and affection. The people adored her, not just because she was their queen, but because she was genuinely invested in their lives. She spoke to them with kindness, asked about their families, and took the time to listen to their concerns. It was clear that she was more than just a distant figurehead. She was a ruler who truly cared for her people, and they loved her for it. As Mark watched these interactions, he began to see Elysia in a new light. She was not just a queen, she was a leader in the truest sense of the word. She had the ability to inspire loyalty and devotion, not through fear or force, but through compassion and understanding. She was someone who believed in the power of unity, who sought to bring out the best in those around her. It was a quality that resonated deeply with Mark, and he found himself wondering if perhaps, in her, he had found someone who could help him find his own path, someone who could show him a different kind of leadership, one that was not forged in the fires of war, but in the bonds of trust and cooperation. By the time the suns had reached their zenith, casting long shadows across the city, Elysia and Mark had returned to the palace. They stood once more on the balcony overlooking Lyanthia, the city spread out before them like a living, breathing tapestry. "Thank you for today, Your Majesty," Mark said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "You've given me much to think about." Elysia turned to him, her eyes filled with a warmth that made Mark's heart stir. "And thank you, Mark, for listening. It's not often that I get to speak so openly with someone, especially someone who understands the weight of leadership as you do." Mark hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "Your Majesty, I've been thinking about your proposal, about what it would mean to accept it." Elysia's expression became more serious, though the warmth in her eyes did not fade. "And what have you decided?" "I haven't made a final decision yet," Mark admitted. "But I will say this, I have seen today what kind of ruler you are, what kind of person you are. And I believe that you truly want what's best for your kingdom. I believe that you are sincere in your desire for a partnership, not just a political arrangement. That means a great deal to me." Elysia's gaze softened, and she took a step closer to him. "Mark, whatever decision you make, know that it will not change my respect for you. I understand the enormity of what I'm asking, and I do not expect you to make this decision lightly. But I want you to know that I see you, not just as a soldier, not just as a hero, but as a man of integrity, of honor. And it is that man I wish to stand beside, if he is willing." Mark felt a surge of emotion at her words, a deep sense of connection that went beyond mere admiration. There was something more here, something that had the potential to grow into something truly profound. But it was a journey they would have to take together, step by step. "I appreciate that, Your Majesty," Mark said, his voice steady. "And I promise you whatever decision I make, it will be with full conviction, with a clear understanding of what it means for both of us." Elysia nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. "That is all I can ask, Mark. Take the time you need. I will be here, waiting." With that, they stood in silence for a while longer, side by side, watching the city below as it bustled with life. The future was uncertain, but in that moment both Elysia and Mark felt a sense of calm, of understanding. They had taken the first steps towards something greater, something that could change the course of their lives and the fate of an entire kingdom. As they parted ways that afternoon, each was left with much to contemplate, but also with a growing sense of hope that, together, they could forge a future that was not just about duty and responsibility, but about love, trust, and the kind of partnership that could withstand the trials of time. And in the days to come, that hope would be tested, challenged, and ultimately transformed into something more powerful than either of them had ever imagined. The days that followed were a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions for Captain Mark. The sunrises and sunsets blurred together as he grappled with the monumental decision before him. It was as if the universe had paused, holding its breath, waiting for him to make a choice that would determine not just his future, but the future of an entire kingdom. Mark had always prided himself on his decisiveness, honed through years of military service, where hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. But this was different. This wasn't a battlefield where the enemy was clear and the objectives defined. This was a crossroads of the heart, where the stakes were immeasurable and the consequences profound. The night before he was to give Queen Elysia his answer, Mark found himself once again in the palace gardens, the same place where she had first made her proposal. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of the exotic flowers that bloomed in the moonlight. The garden was quiet, save for the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant chirping of night creatures. It was a place of reflection, a sanctuary away from the grandeur and formality of the palace. Mark sat on a stone bench beneath an ancient tree, its gnarled branches reaching out like the arms of time itself. His thoughts were heavy, but there was a certain clarity that had begun to emerge, like the first light of dawn breaking through the darkness. He had spent these past days learning about Elysia, her kingdom, and her people. He had seen the strength of her leadership, the compassion she held for her subjects, and the weight of the responsibility she bore. He had come to admire her, respect her, and in ways he had not anticipated, care for her. But admiration and respect were not enough to make this decision. There was something deeper that needed to guide him, something more than duty or obligation. He needed to know if he could truly give himself to her, not just as a king, but as a partner in every sense of the word. As he sat in the stillness of the night, Mark's thoughts drifted back to the life he had led before coming to Erindor. The battles, the losses, the victories, they all seemed so distant now, like echoes from another lifetime. Yet, they had shaped him, forged him into the man he was today. A man who valued honor, who believed in justice, and who had always sought to protect the innocent, no matter the cost. But for all his accomplishments, for all the lives he had saved, there had always been a void, a sense of something missing. He had never allowed himself to dwell on it, never given himself the luxury of introspection. There was always another mission, another war to fight, another crisis to avert. But now, here in this tranquil garden, with the fate of a kingdom resting on his shoulders, he could no longer ignore it. What was it that he truly wanted? What was it that drove him beyond the call of duty, beyond the demands of his conscience? The answer, when it came, was as clear as the night sky above him. He wanted a purpose. Not just a cause to fight for, but a reason to live, a reason to wake up each day and face the challenges of life with hope, with determination, with love. And in Elysia, in her vision for the future, in her quiet strength and unwavering dedication, he saw the possibility of finding that purpose. He saw the possibility of building something greater than himself, of creating a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. He saw the possibility of love, not just romantic love, but the kind of deep, abiding connection that could withstand the trials of time, that could weather the storms of life and emerge stronger on the other side. And as he sat there, under the ancient tree with its branches swaying gently in the breeze, Mark made his decision. He would accept Elysia's proposal, not because of the power it offered, not because of the wealth or the title, but because he believed in her, in the vision she held for her kingdom, and in the potential they had to create something truly extraordinary together. He stood, the weight that had burdened him for days lifting, as he finally found the clarity he sought. The decision was made. Now all that remained was to give Elijah his answer. The following morning, Mark requested an audience with the queen. The sun had just risen, casting a golden light over the palace and filling the halls with warmth. Mark walked with purpose through the grand corridors, his mind focused, his heart steady. He was ready. When he arrived at Elysia's private chambers, he was greeted by her attendant, the same young woman with copper-colored hair who had guided him days earlier. She smiled as she recognized him, sensing the significance of his visit. "Captain Mark, Her Majesty is expecting you," she said, her voice soft and respectful. "Please, follow me." Mark nodded in thanks and followed her down a short hallway that led to a pair of intricately carved doors. The attendant knocked lightly, and a moment later, the doors opened, revealing a spacious room bathed in sunlight. The walls were adorned with delicate tapestries, and the floor was covered in a plush, deep blue carpet that muffled his footsteps. Elysia stood by a large window that overlooked the palace gardens, her back to the door. She was dressed in a gown of deep red, the color of passion and power, and her hair was pulled back into an elegant twist. She looked regal, every inch the queen, but there was a softness to her posture, a quiet anticipation that spoke of the woman beneath the crown. When she heard the door close behind him, Elysia turned to face Mark, her expression calm but watchful. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, hope, perhaps, or maybe a hint of nervousness. It was rare for a queen to show vulnerability, but in this moment Mark could see that she was allowing herself to be just that vulnerable. "Captain Mark," she greeted him, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Thank you for coming." Mark bowed slightly, his expression serious but warm. "Your Majesty, thank you for seeing me. I know we have much to discuss." Elysia nodded, her gaze never leaving his. "Yes, we do. Please sit with me." She led him to a small seating area by the window, where 2 plush chairs were arranged around a low table. A delicate tea set was placed on the table, the porcelain cups decorated with intricate patterns of gold and silver. Elysia poured tea for both of them, her movements graceful and practiced, and handed Mark a cup before taking her own seat. For a moment they sat in silence, the atmosphere charged with unspoken thoughts. Mark could feel the weight of the moment, the significance of what he was about to say. But he also felt a sense of peace, a certainty that had eluded him for so long. Finally, Elysia spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Mark, I want you to know that whatever your decision may be, I will respect it. I know what I've asked of you is not easy, and I do not expect you to take it lightly." Mark set his cup down, his gaze steady as he looked at her. "Your Majesty, these past days have given me much to think about. I've seen your kingdom, met your people, and come to understand the vision you hold for the future. And I've come to realize that your proposal is about more than just power or politics. It's about partnership, about building something together that can truly make a difference." Elysia nodded, her eyes searching his, waiting for him to continue. "I won't lie," Mark went on, his tone earnest. "At first I was conflicted. The idea of becoming a king, of ruling alongside you, it was daunting. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this is an opportunity to find a purpose beyond the battlefield, to create something lasting and meaningful. And it's an opportunity to stand beside someone I respect deeply, someone I believe in." Elysia's breath caught slightly, her gaze unwavering. "Mark." Mark leaned forward, his voice firm but gentle. "Elysia, I've made my decision. I accept your proposal. But I want you to know that I'm not doing this out of obligation or duty. I'm doing this because I believe in you, in your vision, and in the potential we have to build something truly great together. And I promise you, I will give us everything I have." For a moment there was only silence, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Then, Elysia's eyes softened, and a slow, genuine smile spread across her lips. It was a smile of relief, of gratitude, and of something deeper, something that had been growing between them since the day they first met. "Mark," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "you have no idea how much this means to me. I know this was not an easy decision, and I am deeply grateful that you have chosen to stand by my side. Together, I truly believe we can achieve great things." Mark reached out, taking her hand in his, a gesture of solidarity, of trust. "We will, Elysia. I have no doubt." Elysia squeezed his hand, her smile widening. "Then it is settled. From this day forward, we are partners in every sense of the word." Mark nodded, a sense of contentment settling over him. The decision had been made, and for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. He knew there would be challenges ahead, that the path they were about to walk would not be an easy one. But he also knew that with Alesia by his side, they could face whatever came their way. Together Mark repeated, the word holding a promise, a vow. And as they sat there, hand in hand, the sun rose higher in the sky, casting a golden light over the city of Lyanthea, a symbol of the new dawn that had begun not just for them, but for the entire kingdom. The days that followed were filled with preparations. The announcement of Mark's acceptance of Alesia's proposal sent ripples through the kingdom and beyond. Word spread quickly, carried by messengers and transmitted through the advanced communication networks that connected the galaxy. The news was met with a mix of reactions: joy and hope among the people, curiosity and speculation among the other leaders of the galaxy. Within the palace, preparations for the royal wedding began in earnest. The event was to be a grand affair, a celebration that would bring together not just the people of Arendor, but representatives from across the galaxy. It was to be a symbol of unity, of the partnership that Alesia and Mark had forged, and the hope it represented for the future. As the day of the wedding approached, Mark found himself swept up in the whirlwind of activity, yet he also took time to reflect on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He thought of the battles he had fought, the lives he had saved, and the choices that had led him here, to this new chapter in his life. And through it all, he felt a sense of rightness, of purpose, that had eluded him for so long. The night before the wedding, Mark stood on the balcony of his chambers, looking out over the city that had become his new home. The stars above were bright, their light mingling with the glow of the city below. It was a beautiful sight, one that filled him with a sense of peace. As he stood there, lost in thought, he heard a soft knock on the door behind him. He turned to see Alesia standing in the doorway, dressed in a simple gown of white, her hair cascading over her shoulders. She looked ethereal, a vision of grace and beauty. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," she said, her voice soft. Mark smiled, shaking his head. "Not at all. Please come in." Alesia stepped onto the balcony, joining him in gazing out at the city. For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, the night air cool against their skin. "Tomorrow is a big day," Alesia said after a while, her tone thoughtful. "Are you ready?" Mark glanced at her, his expression serious but warm. "I am. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Alesia turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "I'm glad to hear that. I have no doubts, but I wanted to make sure you didn't either." Mark reached out, taking her hand in his. "Alesia, I've faced many challenges in my life, but this is something I want. I want to stand beside you to build a future together. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Alesia smiled, a look of deep affection in her eyes. Together she repeated, the word holding the weight of their shared commitment. They stood there for a while longer, hand in hand, watching the stars. It was a quiet moment, a moment of connection and understanding, and as they looked out at the vastness of the galaxy, they knew that they were ready for whatever the future held. The dawn of a new era was upon them, and together they would rise to meet it. The morning of the royal wedding, the grand hall of the celestial palace was filled with guests from across the galaxy. Representatives from dozens of worlds, leaders of different civilizations, and dignitaries of every kind had gathered to witness the union of Queen Alesia and Captain Mark. The hall itself was a marvel of architecture, its high ceilings adorned with intricate carvings that depicted the history of Arendor, its walls lined with columns of gleaming crystal that seemed to pulse with a soft, inner light. At the center of the hall, a grand aisle stretched from the entrance to the altar, where Alesia and Mark would soon exchange their vows. The aisle was lined with flowers of every color, their petals shimmering in the light of the chandeliers above. It was a scene of breathtaking beauty, a fitting setting for the momentous occasion. The guests had taken their seats, the hum of conversation filling the hall as they awaited the arrival of the bride and groom. At the front of the hall, on a raised dais, stood the high priestess of Arendor, an elderly woman with eyes as sharp as they were kind. She had overseen countless ceremonies in her lifetime, but today's event held a special significance. It was not just a union of two people, it was a union of purpose, of destiny, that would shape the future of the galaxy. As the guests settled into their seats, the The music began to play a soft, melodic tune that filled the hall with a sense of anticipation. The doors at the far end of the hall swung open, and Mark appeared, stepping into the light with an air of calm resolve. He moved down the aisle with the grace of a seasoned soldier, his expression serious but serene. The indigo robes he wore contrasted sharply with the lighter colors around him, giving him an air of quiet dignity. As he walked, he caught glimpses of the faces around him, some familiar, some not, but all watching him with a mixture of respect and curiosity. When Mark reached the altar, he turned to face the hall, his gaze sweeping over the gathered guests. He felt the weight of their expectations, their hopes for what this union would mean for the future. But more than that, he felt a sense of purpose, a certainty that this was where he was meant to be. Then, the music shifted, becoming more vibrant, more uplifting. The doors at the entrance opened once more, and Alicia appeared, her presence like a beacon of light that drew all eyes to her. As she stepped into the hall, there was a collective intake of breath. The queen was a vision of grace and beauty, her silver gown shimmering like stardust, her veil flowing behind her like a cloud of light. But it was not just her appearance that captivated the crowd, it was the aura of strength and serenity that surrounded her, the quiet confidence of a ruler who had earned the love and loyalty of her people. Alicia's heart pounded in her chest as she began her walk down the aisle, but she kept her expression calm, her gaze focused on Mark, who stood waiting for her at the altar. With each step, the enormity of the moment sank in the significance of what she was about to do, the commitment she was making not just to Mark, but to her kingdom, to her people, and to the future they would build together. As Alicia reached the altar, Mark stepped forward to meet her. For a moment they stood facing each other, the world around them fading into the background. There was a deep connection in their gaze, an unspoken understanding that this was the beginning of something extraordinary. The high priestess raised her hands, calling for silence, and the music faded into the background as the ceremony began. People of Arendor, and honored guests from across the galaxy, the high priestess began, her voice resonant and clear. We gather here today to witness the union of Queen Alicia and Captain Mark, a union that represents the joining of two souls, two destinies, and two visions for the future. She turned to Alicia, her eyes filled with warmth. Queen Alicia, you have ruled this kingdom with wisdom and grace, guiding your people through times of peace and times of challenge. Today you take a partner, one who shares your values, your vision, and your commitment to the well-being of your people. Do you, Alicia, take Mark to be your partner, your equal, and your king, to stand beside you in all things, to support and protect, to love and honor as you build your future together? Alicia's voice was clear and strong as she responded, I do. The high priestess then turned to Mark, her gaze steady. Captain Mark, you have proven yourself a man of honor, of courage, and of integrity. Today you take on a new role, not as a soldier, but as a king, a partner to the queen of this great kingdom. Do you, Mark, take Alicia to be your partner, your equal, and your queen, to stand beside her in all things, to support and protect, to love and honor, as you build your future together? Mark met Alicia's gaze, his voice firm with conviction. I do. The high priestess nodded, a smile of satisfaction on her lips. Then, by the power vested in me by the ancient laws of Arendor, and by the will of the people, I pronounce you partners, king and queen, rulers of this kingdom and stewards of its future. With that, she raised her hands, and a beam of light descended from above, enveloping Alicia and Mark in its warm glow. It was a symbolic act, a blessing from the ancient spirits of Arendor, and a reminder of the sacred bond they had just formed. As the light faded, the high priestess stepped back, allowing Alicia and Mark to face the gathered guests. Behold, she announced, her voice ringing through the hall, the rulers of Arendor, Queen Alicia and King Mark. May their reign be long and prosperous, and may their union bring peace and prosperity to this kingdom and beyond. The hall erupted in applause, the sound filling the vast space like a wave. The guests rose to their feet, cheering and clapping, celebrating the union they had just witnessed. Alicia and Mark turned to face the crowd, their hands clasped together, their expressions a mixture of pride and joy. As the applause continued, Alicia leaned closer to Mark, her voice just loud enough for him to hear over the noise. We did it, she said, her tone filled with emotion. We're really doing this. Mark squeezed her hand, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Yes, we are, and I wouldn't want to do it with anyone else. Elysia smiled back, her heart swelling with happiness. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly at peace, truly content. This was the beginning of a new chapter in her life, in their lives, and she knew, deep down, that they were ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The applause slowly died down, and the high priestess raised her hands once more, calling for silence. And now she said, her voice softening, as is tradition, the newly crowned king and queen will share their first dance as a married couple. The music began again, a soft, lilting melody that filled the hall with a sense of warmth and joy. The guests stepped back, creating a space in the center of the hall for Elysia and Mark. Mark turned to Elysia, offering his hand. "May I have this dance, Your Majesty?" Elysia smiled, placing her hand in his. "It would be my honor, Your Majesty." They moved to the center of the hall, the music swelling around them, and began to dance. The world seemed to fade away as they moved together, their steps in perfect harmony, their connection deeper than ever. As they danced, the guests watched in awe, captivated by the sight of their queen and her new king. It was a moment of beauty, of grace, and of hope, a symbol of the future that Elysia and Mark would build together. As the music played on, the stars outside the palace began to twinkle in the evening sky, a reminder that even in the vastness of the galaxy, love and partnership could create something truly extraordinary. And so, in the heart of Lyanthea, surrounded by the people they had vowed to serve, Elysia and Mark began their journey together as king and queen, partners in every sense of the word. The night was filled with celebration, with laughter and joy, as the people of Arendor rejoiced in the union that would shape their future. And as the festivities continued, Elysia and Mark knew that this was only the beginning of their reign, of their partnership, and of the legacy they would leave behind. For in the end, it was not just the crown that mattered, but the bond they had forged, a bond that would carry them through the challenges to come and guide them as they led their kingdom into a new era of peace and prosperity. And as they danced beneath the stars, Elysia and Mark knew that together, they could accomplish anything.